Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder how your brain figures out what a hole is or how it sees things that aren't really there? This new study might have a clue. Today we're diving into some fascinating research about how we see shapes and specifically holes. You know, when you see a donut or a ring, you don't just see the dough part, right? You also see the empty space in the middle. But how does our brain actually represent that empty space? Is it just part of the donut shape or is it something separate? This study tackles that big question. So scientists have been thinking about holes for a long time. They realize that holes aren't really their own thing. A hole is always part of something else, like a piece of paper or a wall. When we see a square with a round hole in the middle, we're not just seeing a square and then a round hole separately. It's more complicated than that. The paper explains that there are two main ideas about how our brain handles this. The first idea is what they call a hole-based representation. This means our brain sees the shape of the hole itself and the shape of the surface around it as two distinct things, like saying it's a square surface with a round hole inside it. The second idea is a surface-based representation. This one says our brain sees the whole thing, the surface between the outer edge and the inner hole, as just one unified shape. It doesn't separate the hole from the surface. Think about a picture frame. In some cases, the inside and outside edges of the frame are the same shape, but in other cases, like a picture frame with a fancy carved edge and a different shaped hole in the middle, this research gets really interesting. The problem is that just listening to how people describe things doesn't always tell us how the brain actually sees them. People might say it's a square with a fish-shaped hole because that's an easy way to say it, but maybe their brain is processing it differently. This is where a cool trick comes in called the Booba-Kiki effect. It's been shown that people tend to associate round shapes with the made-up word booba and spiky shapes with the made-up word kiki. Even babies seem to do this. It's a fundamental way our brains connect sound to shape. The researchers used this booba-kiki trick to test their two ideas. They created shapes with different inner and outer contours. Then they saw if people named them booba or kiki based on whether the overall shape fit the booba-kiki rule for the inner part or for the whole surface. This is where it gets clever. If the brain sees it as whole, based, then the inner contour shape and the outer contour shape should both match the Booba-Kiki rule for consistency. If it's surface-based, then the outer contour and the shape formed by the edge between the hole and the surface should match. So in their first experiments, they had people look at shapes one at a time and say Booba or Kiki. They tested objects and then shapes with holes in them. They found that people mostly named things based on the shape of the inside the hole, even when the outer shape was different. For example, if they showed a flower-like hole inside a circular surface, people tended to say booba, which fits the flower shape. This was true whether the outer shape was a circle or a square. And get this, it took people longer to name the hole shapes than the object shapes, even if they gave the same answer. This might mean it's a bit harder for our brain to process that whole concept. Then in experiment 1b, they changed the outer shape to a square and did the same thing. Again, people named the shapes based on the inner hole shape. This reinforces the idea that the inner shape is really important for how we see these things. The real test came in experiment 2. Here they specifically set up the shapes so that one of their theories would predict a faster response. If the brain is hole-based, then the shape where the inner and outer contours both suggest booba or both suggest kiki should be recognized faster. If it's surface-based, then the shape where the outer contour and the surface edge both suggest booba or kiki should be faster. And you know what they found? When the shapes were consistent with the hole-based idea, meaning both the inner and outer contours aligned on sound symbolism, like both round or both spiky. That is when people were faster to name them. This strongly supports the idea that our brain is representing these hole-bearing surfaces in a hole-based way. It sees the hole as its own shape and the surface as its own shape simultaneously. They weren't just seeing one unified surface. So what does this mean? It means our brains are pretty amazing at handling complex shapes. When we see a donut or a frame, our brain isn't just seeing one blob. It is actively representing both the hole and the surrounding surface as distinct shape entities. This helps explain why we can so easily understand descriptions like a square box with a round opening. The faster reaction times when the shapes were consistent with the hole-based idea are super important. It tells us how efficiently our brain is processing this information. If it were just one surface, we'd expect the surface-based consistency to be faster, but it wasn't. It was the hole-based consistency that sped things up. This research adds solid evidence to the idea that holes are perceived as shapes in themselves. It is not just something we say, it is how our brains seem to work. Even though holes don't have physical substance, our brains still assign them shape. And it seems to happen automatically, not just because we're told to look at the whole. This doesn't mean that wholes and objects are processed exactly the same way though. The study found that naming wholes took longer than naming objects, even when the shape was the same. This might be because our brain has to do a bit more work managing the information from both the whole and the surface. It is like juggling two pieces of information at once. The study does mention a couple of limitations. They used a simple Buba Kiki task, which is great for getting quick responses, but sometimes people don't show as strong of an effect when they have to pick one thing rather than compare two. Also, they only looked at surfaces with one hole. What about something like a colander with lots of holes? That is a whole different ballgame and a great question for future research. Overall, this is a really neat peek into how our visual system constructs reality. It challenges the old ideas that only solid objects can have shape, and shows that our brain is more flexible than we thought. It highlights that the perception of wholes is intimately linked to the surface they are part of, but also that the whole itself is a distinct perceptual entity. So next time you look at something with a hole in it, remember that your brain is doing some serious work representing that empty space as a shape in its own right. Pretty wild, right? This research was conducted ethically and with proper approvals. The authors Rena, Oiwa, and Hiroyuki Muto put a lot of work into this study. You can see their contributions here. And here are all the scientific papers they referenced to build this research. This is such a cool example of how science digs into everyday perceptions and explains the hidden work our brains are doing. What do you think about this whole-based representation? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to Rubin's Mind Lab for more science discoveries made easy. Thanks for watching and well, see you in the next one.